Some things in boxing feel too crazy to be real until they are. You're here right now because you've heard the whispers, seen the headlines, and felt that spark of curiosity. Could it actually happen? Could Jake Paul, the internet sensation turned professional fighter, truly step into the ring with Anthony Joshua, one of the most feared heavyweights in the world? It sounds impossible, right? But here's the thing about boxing. It's never just about what makes sense. It's about money, ego, mind games, and the stories that capture the world's attention. And this might just be the wildest one yet. Because right now, something is brewing beneath the surface. It started with Jake Paul doing what he does best, talking. He didn't just call out Joshua. He made a bold, fearless, and borderline reckless statement. I would effing beat Anthony Joshua's ass. He doesn't have a chin, he has no skill, and he's stiff. Words that, to a casual fan, might seem laughable. But here's the catch. Paul isn't just saying this for fun. He truly believes it. And that's what makes this so dangerous. And then, something unexpected happened. Instead of brushing it off, instead of laughing at the idea, Joshua responded. He didn't say much, but what he did say sent shockwaves through the boxing world. A cryptic post. 2 numbers, 2026. And a single emoji. Now, think about that for a second. Joshua, a former unified heavyweight champion, a fighter who has battled the likes of Vladimir Klitschko, Andy Ruiz, and Oleksandr Usyk, is entertaining this possibility, not denying it, not shutting it down, but letting it sit, letting it breathe, letting the world wonder. And you have to ask yourself why. Why would Joshua even acknowledge this? Why would he even give Jake Paul a second of his attention? Well, that's where things get interesting. Because when you strip it all down, when you look past the noise and the spectacle, you see the real truth about modern boxing. This sport is no longer just about skill. It's about business. And Jake Paul, he is very good for business. But before we go any further, before we break down what this really means, let's step back and understand who Jake Paul has become in the boxing world. Because if you think this is just some YouTuber chasing attention, you're missing the bigger picture. Jake Paul isn't here by accident. He's here because he figured out something that many professional fighters never do: how to control the conversation. Since stepping into the boxing world, he's made a career out of shocking people, proving doubters wrong, and most importantly, making insane amounts of money doing it. Remember when people laughed at the idea of him fighting Ben Askren? He knocked him out in 1 round. Remember when they said he'd never beat Tyrone Woodley? He did it twice the second time by brutal knockout. And then came the real test: Anderson Silva. A legend. A man who had been fighting professionally since Jake Paul was a kid. And yet, Paul won that fight too. So when he looks at Anthony Joshua and says, "I can beat you," the world scoffs. But should they? Or is this just another moment where Paul is playing a game that no one else realizes they're already part of? Because here's what's really going on. Jake Paul isn't just calling out Joshua for attention. He's playing chess while the rest of the boxing world is playing checkers. He understands that the sport thrives on spectacle. He knows that, for better or worse, his name in a headline means money. And if you don't believe me, just look at what happened next. Joshua's promoter, Eddie Hearn, the same man who once dismissed Jake Paul as a sideshow, didn't reject the idea outright. Instead, he said something that changed everything. Jay would fight Jake Paul. He'd fight anyone, to be honest with you. Think about that. Let it sink in. Hearn, a man who has been around boxing his entire life, didn't shut it down. He didn't call it ridiculous. He entertained it. And that tells you all you need to know. Because now, this isn't just a joke. It's a conversation. It's a possibility. And the more people talk about it, the more real it becomes. But let's be honest, if this fight actually happens, what would it look like? Would it be a massacre? Would Joshua destroy Paul in seconds? Or is there a scenario, no matter how small, where the unthinkable happens? Because here's the dangerous part. Jake Paul doesn't fight like a traditional boxer. He doesn't care about the rules of how a career is supposed to go. He's young. He's powerful. And most of all, he's unpredictable. Joshua, on the other hand, is a master of fundamentals. But we've seen him struggle. We've seen him get hurt. We've seen him lose. And Jake Paul? He's the kind of fighter who thrives on exploiting weaknesses. Now, let's be clear, Joshua would be the overwhelming favorite. His power, experience, and technical ability should be too much for Paul. But boxing isn't just about what should happen. It's about what could happen. And if there's even a 1% chance of an upset, that's enough to turn this into one of the biggest fights in history. Because if Jake Paul beats Anthony Joshua, if he somehow finds a way, it wouldn't just be an upset. It would be the biggest shock boxing has ever seen. It would change everything. And you have to ask yourself, what if? What if this fight actually happens? What if Jake Paul pulls off the impossible? What if, in the year 2026, the boxing world looks completely different from how we see it today? Because whether you love him or hate him, Jake Paul is changing boxing. And Anthony Joshua? He might just be the next piece in Paul's ultimate plan. But here's where things take a turn, because if you think this is just another internet stunt, another empty call-out from a man who thrives on controversy, you're missing the bigger picture. This isn't just Jake Paul looking for clout. This isn't just Anthony Joshua toying with an idea for a quick payday. This is something far more calculated. Something far more dangerous. Because in the shadows of this potential fight, something else is brewing. Something that no one is talking about. And if you think about it long enough, you'll start to see it too. Jake Paul isn't just picking a fight. He's setting a trap. Let's break it down. Paul knows exactly how the boxing world sees him. He knows that, no matter how many wins he racks up, no matter how many former champions he beats, people will still call him a joke. A fraud. A YouTuber playing pretend in a sport he has no business being in. And for years, he's been chipping away at that narrative, one fight at a time. When he knocked out Ben Askren, they said, he's just a wrestler. When he beat Tyrone Woodley, they said, he's washed. When he outboxed Anderson Silva, they said, Silva's old. But here's where it gets interesting each time. The stakes got just a little bit higher. Each time, he climbed a little bit closer to something no one thought possible. And now, he's calling out a real heavyweight. A former world champion. A fighter who has stood across the ring from legends. And if you think this is just about proving a point, you're not thinking like Jake Paul. Because this is about something bigger than boxing. This is about rewriting history. If Jake Paul can even stand in the ring with Anthony Joshua, if he can survive, if he can last, if he can show that he belongs, he won't just be a YouTuber anymore. He won't just be an entertainer. He will be something else entirely. And that's where the danger lies. Because let's say for a moment that this fight actually happens. Let's say that, In 2026, the world tunes in to watch Anthony Joshua, the man who once stood atop the heavyweight division, step into the ring against a man who built his career on internet fame. Let's say the bell rings, and Paul does something no one expects. Let's say he fights. Because here's what no one wants to admit: Jake Paul is not a bad boxer. He's young. He's strong. He's aggressive. And, most importantly, he's obsessed with proving people wrong. And Joshua? Joshua is a technician. A fighter who thrives on control, precision, and patience. But what happens when he's thrown into a fight that doesn't make sense? What happens when he's standing across from a man who doesn't fight like a boxer? That's where the cracks start to form. Because if there's one thing we've learned about Anthony Joshua over the years, it's this: when things don't go his way, when the pressure builds, when the fight becomes ugly, he struggles. We saw it against Andy Ruiz. We saw it against Usyk. And Jake Paul? He wants chaos. He thrives in it. So, imagine this scenario. Jake Paul makes it to the later rounds. Joshua is ahead on points, but he's frustrated. He's been hit more than he expected. He's tired. And Paul? He's still standing. That's when the real fight begins. Because at that moment, everything Joshua has built, everything he has worked for, is on the line. And Paul? He has nothing to lose. That's what makes this fight dangerous. That's what makes this fight possible. Not because Jake Paul is better. Not because he's more skilled. But because he believes he can win. And in boxing, sometimes belief is enough to change everything. So now, the question isn't just if this fight happens. The question is, what happens when it does? And more importantly, who walks away from it with their legacy intact? Because one thing is certain: if Jake Paul beats Anthony Joshua, even for a second, the world will never see boxing the same way again. And trust me, this story is far from over.